Now, I spend a lot of time criticizing the loony regressives for being so laughably irrational. This time, I'm taking a look at a response video that a lot of them made, asking what they're calling reasonable questions for anti-SJWs. Now, all it really does is show that they wouldn't know a reasonable question if it bit them, so let's get started. Well, not to anyone with a clue they didn't, but that's part of the problem. The SJWs have their own fanatical perspective, and damn it, nobody's going to change their mind. Logic, reason, and evidence, they mean nothing to them because it gets in the way of their precious widow feelings. Don't let reality interfere with your emotions. Well, this ought to be good. Let's see if these are actually reasonable questions, or just more SJW bullshit.
Are you able to understand the irony of responding to the perceived political correctness of the left with exasperated reactionary hypersensitivity of your own?
Except nobody, at least nobody that I've seen, is doing that. Now granted, I don't watch a lot of the people in that opening spinning video thing that they did, so I can't speak for what they say, but anyone I pay attention to doesn't get emotional about the idiotic antics of the SJW crowd. They just point out where the SJWs are factually incorrect. Emotion should never be part of the debate on either side.
What is it with you people and skulls?
I don't know, sorry, don't own any.
How do you define right-wing? Anti-SJWs often have an aversion to being labelled as right-wing, yet they regularly defend the right and bash the left. Therefore, why is being labelled right-wing a bad thing to you? And if it's because right-wing is used as a pejorative, can you not see how labelling people as SJWs or regressives is also pejorative?
Hey, I'm perfectly fine with being labeled right-wing, but that's because I'm a conservative. You have to remember that this whole thing is a spectrum. Everyone is either more right or left-wing than somebody else. Now, I'm a lot more right-wing than most of the anti-SJW video makers on YouTube, but I'm a hell of a lot less right-wing than the religious fundamentalists in this country. Why are you so worried about labels anyhow?
Rather than telling people you disagree with to drink bleach, wouldn't it be more productive for you to have an actual conversation about the issues you feel matter? Or is it just easier to do the bleach thing?
Yeah, because we have to remember that back in the Atheism Plus days, go die in a fire was a common insult. I'm sure you people just conveniently forgot about all the facts because they're inconvenient. But that's because you're hypocrites. Now, I can only speak for myself, but I've never seriously told anyone to go die or anything like that. It doesn't actually address the debate that ought to be happening.
You claim to be proponents of rational, logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great. That's entirely laudable. But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, I don't know, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR?
Well, again, I can't speak for anyone else because I don't read Twitter at all, but how is any of that not evidence-based or logic-based? It certainly isn't emotional-based like you people are. I don't recommend people trolling anyone. In fact, I've spoken out against it many times, but when you have one side that simply won't listen to logic, reason, or evidence, what other choices do you have?
No, seriously? What is it with you people and skulls?
Been there, done that, you're an idiot.
Are you aware that the ridiculous buzzwords you helped to popularize, like SJW and cuck and regressive, have all lost whatever meaning they once had, and only serve now as casual insults and pejoratives to derail any meaningful conversation?
Are you aware that the ridiculous buzzwords that you've helped to popularize, like misogynist, sexist, racist, rape culture, etc., have all lost whatever meaning they once had and only serve now as casual insults and pejoratives to derail any meaningful conversation? You moron.
For the last time, what is it with you people and committing actual literal felonies? Like, you might want to work on that? I mean, I thought the Ralph retort was so rational when he was fantasizing about beating up women with dyed hair, but then he assaulted a police officer, and finally I was convinced.
Anyone who commits a crime, regardless of political ideology, deserves to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But what one individual does has no bearing on anyone else. Logic. You might want to work on that.
In videos and in the comment sections, anti-feminists often take up the most extreme or the weakest feminist position they can find, or they just straight up misrepresent what the feminist position is. Instead, why not take up the strongest, most robust feminist argument you can find and really challenge yourself?
Well, why don't you let us know when you actually come up with a strong feminist position, won't you? Again, speaking only for myself, I only respond to a specific position that a specific feminist is trying to say in a specific video. If you have a problem with those positions, go take it up with those feminists. It isn't my fault that specific feminists make some really stupid videos.
I am deeply concerned with male addiction rates, suicide rates, and abuse rates, because I have worked with these issues in the quote-unquote real world. Would you be willing as anti-feminists to put aside your differences with feminists for the greater good of addressing these issues, especially as the kind of solutions needed are not necessarily gendered? And if so, I would actually like you to let me know, because I'm not fucking around or presenting any gotchas here. I actually really think that we could get something done if we work together. So, yeah.
Absolutely. But you don't see many people actively working on these issues within the larger feminist community. And when it's pointed out to them, they get upset because I guess they think it deflects from their general ideology. These are actual, demonstrable, factual issues, unlike some of the things that feminists complain about, which have already been completely debunked.
What is third wave feminism? Because I've often heard you folks insist that you have no objection to feminism in general. It's specifically third wave feminism that you have a quarrel with. So what is third wave feminism specifically? And what specifically about third wave feminism do you have such a problem with?
You ought to try doing some research, Steve. I mean, I know that's hard for you, but Google is your friend. Wikipedia has a pretty decent write-up on third wave feminism. This really isn't that hard.
Why is it that this feminist represents all feminists, but this men's rights activist doesn't represent all men's rights activists?
Whoa, wait, sexism all of a sudden? Ladies and men are different? So we're supposed to punch men and not hit ladies and open doors for men, but not ladies? Fuck you, get out of my face, you tiny piece of shit.
Nobody's ever said she represents all feminists. Everyone represents themselves. Trigglypuff just became the poster child of the behaviors and activities that we're seeing from a lot of third wave feminists, which is characterized by irrational, emotional outbursts. Now, you're welcome to criticize anybody you like, but their actions are not representative of anyone but themselves.
Why am I continually asked to answer for the views of feminists if I agree with feminism's overall aims, but don't agree much with those particular feminists? Does that mean that I can ask you to answer for anybody who labels themselves similarly to you, even if you don't agree much?
Well, then you just say you don't agree with those particular views. When you identify as a particular label, the assumption, right or wrong, is that you identify with the stated goals and aims of that particular label. Now, we all know that's not necessarily the case, but it's ridiculous to get offended because someone assumes that you accept all of those goals and aims. It's up to you to correct them. Welcome to the real world.
If SUs are bad because they spend too much time whining and don't talk about real problems, then why aren't you talking about those problems instead of just whining about the other people over and over and over for literally years? I mean, in the scale of priorities, that's like even lower, right? You know, you've got the real problems, you've got the things that feminists worry about, and then you've got you going, oh, how dare they? Just how dare they have different priorities from me? Why can't they do what I do? Whine about whining forever for a living. That's healthy.
Well, in fact, a lot of us are. Now, sticking to SJW whiners, when they all get emotional about something that's complete nonsense, like rape culture or the gender wage gap, we address those questions with facts and figures showing how absurd the whole thing is. We do address actual, demonstrable problems. It's not our fault that the SJW side doesn't have any.
Why don't you seem as concerned with actual feminist theory in academia as you are with wrecking people for views?
Well, actual feminist theory in academia is often complete and total bullshit. But of course, the feminists on YouTube and Tumblr, they're not spouting actual feminist theory, are they? They're spouting overly emotional, irrational nonsense, and that's what the majority of us actually respond to. Is there a YouTube channel out there that actually presents feminist theory in an interesting way? Because if there is, I'd be more than happy to address it.
Since so many of you profess to be admirers of second-wave feminism as opposed to third-wave feminism, I thought it would be interesting to ask which second-wave feminists in particular do you appreciate? Which books written by second-wave feminists have you read and found interesting? Which second-wave feminist activists have you specifically admired as you formed the opinion that you like second-wave feminism but you have no use for third-wave feminism? I'm just curious.
But that's the thing, though. It's not about people. It's about ideas. First and second wave feminism had actual, demonstrable problems that they addressed. They had legitimate problems that needed legitimate solutions. Their beliefs were entirely valid. Modern third wave feminism simply doesn't have that. They complain for the sake of complaining because reality doesn't make them happy, because they can't tell the difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. They're seeing problems that don't actually exist. They're not fighting for the right to vote or the right to be legally equal to men. They're fighting for the right to feel good, and that's not something that exists. It's not the people or the books that matter, it's the fight. And third wave feminism simply has no legitimate fight.
You do understand that reading the title of a book or an article or watching the first 15 seconds of a video is not going to give you a deep, nuanced understanding of what that book or article or video is about, right? That being said, how can you expect to understand or critique feminist sources if you don't even attempt to understand what they're trying to say?
You do realize that having an emotional reaction to a claim, say like the gender wage gap, doesn't give you any of the actual facts involved, right? I mean, just because the idea makes you feel bad doesn't mean that the whole thing is actually supported by facts or evidence, right? You people know that, right? You gotta figure this stuff out.
Why is trying and failing to debunk a study into sexual assault the number one priority for a rational thinker now? Does it maybe say something about your priorities? Does it? Nah, it's fine, it's the feminazis, we have to stop them. They're taking away our video games. Look, Anita, I'm sorry, but we can't actually destroy video games. That doesn't make any sense.
Because it isn't a failure. Just because you don't like the reality doesn't make the reality go away. Facts are facts, regardless of how they make you feel. And when our side debunks your claims with actual facts and figures, instead of rejecting the claim as false, you just whine about it some more and continue to repeat the debunked claim.
One of the major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people. And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections. I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out. At least not that I can see. So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people and their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you? And in that light, would you be willing to break bread and salt with moderate Muslim people on your videos, have hangouts, invite them to your channels, just in order to build some bridges there and to learn more about what they think and how they feel and what their experience has been, so that information and knowledge can be furthered?
I'm going to be honest. The Quran is filled with all kinds of horrific things, just like the Bible is. There's no way that you can take a book like the Quran or the Hadiths and say, this is what I believe, but not that part of it, which is inconvenient and doesn't fit in the modern world, so I'm just going to pretend it's not there. And that goes for Christians who do the same thing. The problem isn't the interpretation. The problem is the book. And I don't see too many theists willing to rewrite their books to get rid of the horrific stuff and only keep the parts they seem to like. So long as it's there, there's a problem. Not all Muslims are terrorists, but all Muslims profess to follow the same book that calls for terrorism. And the same goes for Christianity. Would I be willing to break bread with a moderate Muslim? Absolutely. I'll talk to anybody. But if they're going to be irrational, and all religious people are irrational by definition, I'm going to point that out. Believing stupid things, no matter how much faith you have in it, is still believing stupid things.
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general? If so, what? Okay, just step over, just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk. If not, why is it so much more important to you to demonize groups like Black Lives Matter than to actually use your platforms to discuss actual solutions to issues surrounding race and racism?
Yes, I do. Please show where institutionalized systemic racism against anyone actually exists in the real world. Produce evidence to support your claims. The FBI crime statistics proves conclusively that blacks commit more violent crimes by far than any other racial groups. It's not racist to recognize reality. And we demonize groups like Black Lives Matter because they're not actually interested in addressing the real problem. They want the police to leave black criminals alone. The only thing that really matters is stopping blacks and everybody else from being criminals in the first place. Everyone gets treated equally, and BLM doesn't like that.
If you've ever discussed or done a video about black on black crime, when are you going to do a video about white on white crime and what we, as white people, can do to solve the problems in our community?
The problem is that we're addressing Black Lives Matter, which specifically focuses on police versus black criminals, but it doesn't actually give a damn about the lives of blacks that are murdered at an alarming rate by other blacks. But BLM doesn't want to address that. They don't want to talk about it. They want to pretend it doesn't exist. If they actually cared about black lives, as they profess to, they'd be addressing this clear and demonstrable problem. Funny they don't, huh?
Why is a literal teenager's different definition of racism from you so horrifying that you all have to go, No! No, we have to stop him! We've got to debunk him now! Ah!
Words have meanings for a reason. If words are not understood with common definitions, we cannot have a meaningful conversation. So when people use words wrong, and your side pretty much does that all the time, it's got to be addressed.
Wherever did you get the idea that racism was a self-applied identity? And if the only true racists are the racists who self-identify as racists, how can we ever expect to make any social progress to reduce racism? Or did I just answer my own question?
It's funny how your side holds the position that blacks can't be racist just because they're black. You redefine the word because you can't rationally defend the idea. And then you complain about it. Sure, that makes sense.
You often say that you are for equality of opportunity, but if people of color, for instance, have to overcome barriers whites do not, such as discrimination and unequal treatment as are well documented in various studies, then how can the current situation be thought of as equal opportunity in any real way? And why do you consider it racist to discuss these issues?
You'd actually have to demonstrate that they get discriminated against based solely on their skin color, which you and I both know you can't do. There's a difference between making a claim and defending that claim. You're really good at making claims of discrimination. You're not very good at backing them up. So long as that's the case, you really have nothing, and you don't like people pointing out that you have nothing. The fact remains, though, just to give an example, that everyone in this country has an equal opportunity to get an education. Schools are available for them to attend. If they choose to drop out of school, as a huge majority of inner-city black students do, then how is it the fault of the school? There's a point at which individuals have to take responsibility for taking advantage of what they have been given. I know you people hate the word responsibility, but there you go.
Do you understand basic English syntax? Like, if I say this cat is pretty, I don't mean that all other cats aren't pretty. Like, do you really not get why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter is not only racially insensitive, but just patently ridiculous?
But you're not saying this black person's life matters. You're saying all black people's lives matter as a means to express that they're more important than the lives of others. And as I and a lot of other people have pointed out, a better name for your movement would have been Black Lives Matter too, which I think everybody would agree with. However, you're trying to separate black people from white people, which is why BLM and other similar organizations are pushing for segregation. You don't actually want equality and responsibility for your own lives. You want special treatment.
Isn't it offensive to men to assume that a man could only ever want equality for women and therefore be comfortable with feminism as a whole in order to get laid, and that reduces us to beasts? If that was the case, wouldn't I attempt to get laid from my views instead of not ever trying that?
I want equality for all, period. All races, all genders, all sexual orientations, without exception. I do not single out any group for anything. It's all or nothing. The fact that there's a lot of white knights out there on the SJW side whose ridiculous liberal ideology has led them to kiss up to radical feminism for social acceptance is not in doubt. Blame those people.
If you say you're an egalitarian, will you call out the man-hating slurs that you see coming from people within your community? People who use terms like cuck, beta male, faggot, or mangina? All of these things basically distill men down into thinking that the most important thing about them is to be having sex with a woman. That's rather offensive. So what are you doing to stop this kind of behavior in your community?
I call out everything worth calling out equally, thanks. But you're off getting offended by words while ignoring the concepts behind the words. This is another case of feelings overriding reality. Maybe instead of getting so upset at the words used, you ought to figure out why and ask yourself if those ideas are actually valid.
What is the number of followers, the number of likes, the number of dislikes, the number of retweets, the number of subscribers, any of those numbers, any of those metrics, what have they got to do with the argument? Deepak Chopra, for example, a man who trots out an endless stream of pseudoscientific quantum woo bollocks, has nearly 3 million followers. So what? Those people follow him because he tells them what they want to hear. Why even mention the number of followers you have? What difference does it make?
Not a damn thing, which is why I don't give a crap about them. The only thing that matters is the facts and the evidence. Deepak Chopra is a douchebag, and he's followed by a bunch of irrational idiots. The same's true of a lot of people on the SJW side. The number of morons you can convince to follow you has nothing at all to do with the quality of the points that you make.
Why is it that you go on and fucking on about safe spaces and trigger warnings and delicate little flowers, but continue to hide behind your cartoon avatars and your childish pseudonyms, and whenever anyone calls you out on your sexist, racist, homophobic, bigoted rhetoric, you become the argument of your own scorn and are hashtag triggered, as they say?
Because all of that removes the responsibility that people need to have for themselves and their reactions. Why do you insist on infantilizing supposed adults to the point that they have to run and hide and play with puppies to avoid dealing with reality? In what world is that a good thing?
Are you willing to publicly acknowledge and admonish the massive amount of hatred, bullying, harassment, and intimidation that a lot of your fans infringe upon people? And I don't mean these tiny disclaimers that you put under the description fold or flash for 2 seconds at the beginning of the video that you know nobody reads. I mean a public and ongoing anti-bullying stance. Or do you kind of like watching your fans go around harassing people and calling them slurs and telling them to kill themselves? You kind of like it, don't you? I mean, if that's your thing, I guess that's just what you're into. Just makes you a dick.
We're not responsible for what anyone else does, any more than you are. We openly tell people not to harass others, but that's the limit of our power over anyone else's actions. Rent a clue. And let's be honest, nobody's harassing you. If they were, you could report it to YouTube and get them banned. Just because you get upset that somebody says something mean to you does not mean it's harassment. Grow up.
Why do you find it so hard to believe that feminists are being harassed online?
Well, when you can prove it, and that means actually getting a large number of people banned from YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, then you might have a point. But your definition of harassment seems to be anyone who disagrees with you, and that's not reality.
Do you understand the key importance of reproducibility and repeatability in scientific research? That's simply going to Google Scholar, doing a 30-second search for keywords and pulling out the first paper you find that backs up your stance is not a particularly credible way to do research. That you have to have a much broader overview to read the material, to follow the citations through, to look at the broad brush approach to a particular problem. You do realise that you're as much of a social justice warrior as those you critique. It's just that you espouse a different form of social justice, a rather less considerate, rather less forgiving, rather less kind form of social justice.
Except that's blatantly untrue. Lots of us have gone through in detail looking at the actual evidence for things like the gender wage gap and proven conclusively that the whole idea is complete and utter bullshit. Your side is the one getting emotional over ideas, not bothering to verify those ideas, not bothering to look at or understand the actual data, and then screaming that something that is completely unjustified must be true just because it makes you feel bad. Come on back when your side has done 1/10 of the actual research and has 1/10 of the actual data that our side has.
If you identify as an egalitarian, then I'm interested in your take on the usefulness of the concept of the original position as laid out by John Rawls in his theory of justice.
And that's totally irrelevant. Concepts change over time. Liberalism today has nothing to do with what liberalism meant 200 years ago. Labels are just that, labels. They describe a particular position or idea that can be summed up and commonly understood by a single word or phrase. I don't understand how you people can't know that.
As a supporter, as a proponent of freedom of speech, why do you want to quash academic freedom? If you're not familiar with the concept of academic freedom, it's worth, in the UK at least, looking up the 1988 Education Reform Act and seeing what that says about the rights of academics to put across unpopular opinions.
Except we're not the ones telling university professors they can't use source material that might offend someone. We're not telling university presidents that schools are about family, not learning. That's your side. We're not even telling you can't make videos about anything you want. By all means, please do. We just reserve the right to show how idiotic what you say actually is.
Why are you so obsessed with Anita Sarkeesian?
You know, I honestly can't remember the last time I thought about Anita Sarkeesian. Is she still a thing?
Do you really think you can spend your entire life in a perpetual state of emotional immaturity? Do you actually imagine that you will be able to perpetuate your adolescence for your entire existence? Wait, didn't somebody else ask this one? Wait, I gotta... fuck.
Are you looking in the mirror again? Because spending all your time feeling your way through life is not mature. But that's all your side does. And I ask it every time I see an SJW video. Maybe that's where you saw it. Or Sargon. Or a lot of people. I'm glad you agree with us. Now stop behaving that way. You know, every time I see one of these videos where the SJWs are trying to defend themselves, I can't help but wonder if they realize just how stupid they look. I mean, they're just a walking commercial for our side. They make fools of themselves and don't even realize how ridiculous they are. But then again, they have a completely bizarre view of the world. They think the world owes them stuff. And they're wrong. They have to work for and earn what they get. And when they're lazy and don't want to get off their butts and work, they whine that the world isn't fair and society owes them a living. They live in a fantasy world filled with trees and flowers and chirping birds, and somebody needs to take them away, haha. Sooner or later, these people need to grow the hell up and realize that the world owes them nothing. They're personally responsible for their own lives, and hard work and responsible living is the only way they're going to achieve anything worthwhile in the world. Hopefully, they learn this lesson sooner than later. What they're doing now is just ruining society, which is why liberalism always precedes the downfall of every great nation. Hop on that liberal nuke and ride it all the way down, because that's where we're headed. But of course, they won't take any responsibility for that either, will they?